Is Social Security the biggest Ponzi scheme in history? It's a program that we're legally forced to pay into for our entire working life. But what if I told you it's a $20 trillion scam? That's right. Your hard-earned money is going into a system that's on the brink of collapse and nobody's talking about it. And today, I'm going to expose exactly how the government's been lying to you about your financial future. I mean, think about it. Tens of millions of people are relying on Social Security. And if it ends, well, it's not going to be pretty. And for a bit of context, Social Security was created in 1935 as part of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, promising financial stability for the elderly. And it was actually a brilliant idea. You know, it was supposed to guarantee that once you retired, the government would be there with a monthly check, ensuring you wouldn't fall into poverty after decades of hard work. It brought faith to the working class that they wouldn't be left screwed at the end of their career. But here's the unfortunate reality. It's not as secure as it was once thought it would be. You see, you and I, alongside all working Americans, are required to pay about 12.4% of your income into this system. Half comes from you and half from your employer. That's a chunk of your paycheck disappearing every single month, and a pretty big one at that. The average American worker earns $54,000 a year. At 12.4%, that's $6,711 paid into Social Security every single year, which is over $328,000 over the lifetime of their working life. Not even taking into account that if it was compounded, it would be worth millions and millions of dollars. But here's the kicker. Social Security is bleeding money. It's paying out more than it's taking in. And by 2034, the Social Security Trust Fund is expected to be empty. That is less than 10 years away. So if you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, the money you're paying in today might not actually be there when you retire, which is super scary if you're depending on it as a safety cushion in retirement. And if you don't believe me, here's the math behind why it's doomed to fail. You see, when Social Security started, there were 16 workers for every one retiree. 16 people paying in, one person collecting. That ratio kept the system stable, but today there are only 2.7 workers for every retiree. And by 2035, it'll be 2 to 1 or even worse. And this is obviously a huge problem. Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, like I mentioned before. It's not a savings account where your contributions are held for you until retirement. Instead, the money you pay today goes directly to current retirees. When there aren't enough workers paying into the system, how do we pay all these benefits? Well, you're gonna find out. This isn't just theoretical. It's happening right now. The Social Security Administration itself has admitted that by 2035, payroll taxes will only be able to cover 79% of benefits. That means future retirees could see a 21% cut in their payments if they get anything at all. Now, let's make this a little bit more personal so you kind of understand what I'm saying. If you're an average American earning around $54,000 per year, you're paying about $6,700 into Social Security annually, right? Over a 40-year career, that's around $300,000. But here's the brutal truth. Even after paying in that much, the benefits you get back may not be enough to cover your basic living expenses in retirement, especially with the way that inflation is moving right now. And today, the average Social Security benefit for retirees is a little over $1,800 per month, which is around $22,000 per year. Now, I don't know about you, but do you think you could live on $22,000 a year even today? I don't know, maybe if you paid off your home and you live super frugal, but what about in 20 or 30 or 40 years? And now for someone earning the average salary, $22,000 a year is a massive pay cut. Imagine trying to live on that in retirement. Between rent, food, healthcare, it's barely enough to get by, especially in cities where the cost of living is skyrocketing. And don't forget, Medicare doesn't cover anything. You'll still be on the hook for things like copays, dental, vision, and long-term care. And those are the most important things when you get older. So the question is, are you paying into a system that's gonna leave you high and dry, or is it actually going to benefit you like the reason why it was designed in the first place? Now, of course, some people go to great lengths to say that Social Security looks a lot like a Ponzi scheme. And they're not entirely wrong. You know, in a Ponzi scheme, early investors get paid with the money from new investors. But once the new investors stop coming, the whole thing collapses. So even the best Ponzi scheme, even though it might look like a business on the surface, is really just going to crumble at some point in time because eventually you'll run out of new investors. And right now, Social Security relies on new workers like you and I to pay for current retirees. But the major problem here is there aren't enough workers coming into the system. People don't want to have kids, and too many people are retiring. And this imbalance means the system is on a collision course with disaster. Again, there was a 16-to-1 worker-to-retiree ratio, and in 2023, a 2.7-to-1 worker-to-retiree ratio. And when the money runs out, what happens next? The government has a few options. One, they could raise taxes on workers, which means you'll have even less on your paycheck left. Two, they could cut benefits for retirees, meaning after a decade of work, you get a smaller check, which is probably the most likely option, coupled with this third option, which is raise the retirement age again, maybe 70 or higher, which means you have to live well into your 80s, 90s, and 100 years old to be able to really maximize and enjoy those years. Otherwise, what was the point of you paying so much of your hard-earned income into the system? Now, let's talk about your return on investment. So if you're paying 12.4% of your income into Social Security every year, how does that stack up against other options? Like if you invested that money in a standard S&P 500 index like VOO or VTI, and it earns you an average of 7% annual return, which is like, post-inflation, well, this is kind of what you'd expect. A worker making $50K a year, contribute that 12.4% for 40 years, could have saved around $1.3 million by retirement, assuming a 7% return. Now, again, that is like no investment experience anyone can do. And instead, with Social Security, you're looking at a benefit of $1,800-ish a month over 20 years in retirement. That's around $500K in total. And again, if it even arrives, and compare that to the $1.3 million example, if you could have just taken that money and invested it on your own. The difference is staggering. Honestly, kind of makes me sick to my stomach because even average investors can get 9%, 10% return on their investments and have basic knowledge of picking stocks, which means that $1.3 million could be $2 million, $3 million by the time you hit retirement. And the big question for me is there any way we can fix this? And the answer is maybe, but we have to know what we can do. And politicians have been arguing about this for decades. But here's the problem. Nobody wants to make the tough choices. You see, raising taxes, cutting benefits, or raising the retirement age are all politically unpopular. Nobody wants to tell the public that Social Security is in trouble, so they just keep kicking the can down the road. And the longer we wait, the worse it gets. By 2035, Social Security is expected to run out of money. And if that happens, future retirees will only receive about 75% of their promised benefits. For millennials and Gen Z, that's a disaster waiting to happen. And without any changes, eventually, this money will run out and Social Security will fail. And I think the more important questions we should be asking is, rather than raising taxes or cutting benefits or raising the retirement age, I think we should be asking of how do we make more workers? And that's a question of maybe immigration, or a question of maybe raising the health standards and the living standards of our citizens to want to have more children to bring into this world, and the hope of a bright and beautiful future. Or at the very least, what if we just took a different approach with Social Security, and instead of relying on a failing government program, we allowed people to invest their Social Security contributions privately on their own. And on top of that, educate the people on how to actually invest their money in the public school system. You see, Chile did something similar back in the 1980s, allowing workers to put their money into private retirement accounts. And it's actually had some really good success. Like Chile's private pension system has grown 10% annually since its inception, significantly outpacing Social Security. Of course, privatization comes with risks, market volatility, inequality, and lack of safety nets for the poor, but it begs the question, would you rather take a chance on the market or continue pouring your hard-earned money into a system that may not be there when you need it? So what does this all mean for you and I? And where does this leave you? If you're an average worker making $50,000 a year, you're being forced to pay thousands into a system that's mathematically broken. And the whole truth is Social Security was a great idea 80 years ago, but today it's a relic of the past that's struggling to keep up with modern demographics and economics. You've been paying into the system for years, but what if it's time to start thinking differently about your financial future? Should you even think about relying on Social Security? Or is it time to look at other ways to secure your retirement? And it's not a question of, am I gonna have something to look forward to in retirement? It's a question of, am I gonna have anything to look forward to in retirement? Or am I gonna have to just continuously work till I die? And that's the case for a lot of people. You see, most of America doesn't have an adequate enough retirement on their own. They depend on Social Security. And if we continue this dependence, that might lead to some serious problems down the road. And in the end, Social Security might not just be a scam in the legal sense, but it certainly feels like one for the average person. You pay in for decades, and in return, you get a system that's falling apart. But the power to secure your financial future lies in your hands. And I think it's time we start having real conversations about what happens next. Should we reform Social Security, privatize it, or scrap it all together? I wanna know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. And as always, if you found this video useful and insightful, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to know what's really going on with Social Security and in the world of finance.